Welcome to Command Shift Left, the podcast that helps you navigate the treacherous waters of the software development, ops, and security world while also diving into the hot current trends in the industry. Join myself, developer Philip, our co-host Orvice.
Hey audience!
As we battle through hilarious real-world stories, pro tips and hacks for navigating your way around developer security, learning about our Shift Left life, and life stories that have saved our ass. It's an absolute pleasure to have two amazing guests with us today, Sam and Aviv. It's a pleasure having you here. Maybe you want to give a short introduction about yourself, and let's start with Sam.
Hi guys, I'm Sam Richard. I work at ungrok as head of growth. I've been there all of 3 months, but I specialize in optimizing for our self-service revenue during the user journey. Prior to joining ungrok, I was at OpenView Venture Partners as VP of growth. I was there for around 3 to 4 years, working with the portfolio on all things product-led growth, fell in love with the developer tooling, and started to pursue that. In my spare time, I also do some consulting around user journeys for startups, and trying to figure out, what does your growth roadmap look like for the next year?
For those who don't know, Sam authored the developer-focused go-to-market playbook. I usually refer to that book as the Bible. So really, if any listeners haven't checked it out, I highly recommend it.
And Aviv?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. I'm Aviv Ben Yosef. My life's mission is to help create world-class engineering teams. And I am a self-styled expert in tripling impact per engineer. And I do that usually by coaching and advising founders and executives in startups. And also, I authored 2 books. One is called The Tech Executive Operating System, and the second is currently titled Capitalize on Your Technology, but it's only going to be out in a few months, and the publisher might change the name, so stay tuned.
Sounds great anyway.
Yeah.
And you also have your own podcast.
I do. I have the Tech Exec podcast that is about 6 minutes long every week.
Short and to the point.
Something for you to listen to right between meetings.
Perfect.
Nice. Perfect. And in no particular order, let's start with our first fact. And that fact is by Aviv. So please take it away.
So, from a recent survey, 69% of engineers believe their projects have a high amount or very high amount of tech debt. Now, to me, this feels like, every single engineer I see who comes to the company or sees a new product, like, who did this, right? The person did this, shouldn't have been given the license to code, who gave them a keyboard. And I kind of feel like, I'd love to hear your takes, but my feeling is that we have, as an industry, gotten a bit addicted to tech debt. As in, engineers see it everywhere. Every piece of code I don't like is tech debt. Everything that's not precisely how it should be is tech debt. And especially every time I want to play along with some new technology, whatever it takes to get there is tech debt, and therefore I can.
So it's like a magic word.
I now have an excuse to rewrite everything in Rust.
So tech debt essentially is a word that's being way overused without taking account the actual meaning of what it is, right?
Yeah. Well, I would say, now, I might be biased because I feel like tech debt is, for many teams, sort of a way to gain control because, you can take that card, you have that card, you say it's tech that we have to do something, right? And the product people often can't really tell how serious it is. And if the engineers really insist, no, we have to tackle this, they probably are going to get the time. But I genuinely think that it's a bit of, we're abusing our power and the fact that we have this special card. And also sometimes, just sometimes, we, let's go with the analogy. It's called tech debt, right? And what do you do with that? You pay it in, you have payments usually when you take a loan. And when you pay for a loan, you have the principal and you have the interest. So many teams are basically just paying the interest and are not going for the principal. Yeah. And I'm going to stop speaking economics, but specifically what I mean is that what I feel like we're doing is we're just doing the interesting parts on top rather than say, what does it take so that I will never have this problem again in the future? So like, can we take this part of the system and change it so that it comes from something that's weighing down on us to a superpower? And you can't do that all the time, probably not even half of the time. But I think when we do that, we just might unlock something that's, that's part of the moat eventually.
I agree. I'll say that we've recorded several episodes now. I'm not sure what will be the order that we'll be actually releasing them, but we've recorded several episodes, and I don't think we had a single one where the conversation didn't end up at technical debt.
That's very true.
So this is the first time where technical debt is a fact.
There you go.
Top line, but we always ended up at least touching, if not going in depth into technical debt. And I think you've mentioned something very important, like the economics around debt. Having debt is not a bad thing. Sometimes debt is a leverage that you can grow your economy, to grow your business, to grow whatever you're building. So it's tech debt. It doesn't mean that you should get rid of it, even just by itself. But I actually find the base part of your fact most interesting, the fact that you were saying most people think that they have more technical debt than they actually have. So it's not only like there's an inflation of tech debt. So it's both we're not making use of the debt and we think that we have more of it.
Well, and my question too is, so there's this meme going around on Twitter that certain things are zero interest rate phenomenon. So like, I don't know, having a masseuse at work is a zero interest rate phenomenon. Is tech debt a zero interest rate phenomenon? Is it something that we care more about when things are good? Or is it something that developers are going to be using in this like very scary era of people not knowing if they're keeping their tech jobs? Is it something that it becomes even larger, almost inflationary as people fear for their jobs?
Maybe the tech debt is the reason that you have your job. As long as it's there, especially like think about things like mainframes and COBOL. Like it's a form of technical debt. We're stuck with that thing, and it gives job security to a bunch of people that are otherwise were maybe even unemployable, at least in this sector.
I would add that when I was researching, the 69% is from a real survey. So I saw other surveys, and a significant portion of startups and tech companies are spending 10 to 20 to 25% of their engineering time on handling tech debt. And we just saw quite a few companies slash, let's say, 5 to 10 to 15% of their workforce. And my question is, are they now just going to start piling on tech debt? Or maybe, just maybe, they realize that a lot of this tech debt isn't really tech debt. I asked like a couple of dozens of CEOs who had layoffs, and essentially every one of them, when I asked them, so are you now adjusting your roadmap for the end of 2023 to be, to have less things in it because you just cut 5 or 10% of your team? And they're like, no, we're going to be moving just as fast, maybe faster. So, there's a dissonance here.
The remaining employees are far more scared for their jobs now that they're going to outperform all the rest of the team before. We just needed to wait for the supply to meet demand in the right way.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting because now I'm thinking about it. And if we think about tech debt, well, how do we actually categorize that? Because technically we could say that, would there be developer jobs if there was no tech debt? Because essentially, it's all about kind of maybe offering better solutions, right? Abstracting away from what maybe was old and going with something that's maybe new and more performant. But actually, is that tech debt or is that not tech debt? Is that an improvement to something? Is that the responsibility of a developer or not, right?
I think it kind of touches on the question is making the same value prop, the same product, but new. Is that a feature delivery? Is that value that is being provided to the customer? And in some cases, I think business owners would definitely say yes because they invest a lot in it. So think about, I hate that this is the example that comes to my mind, but think about the Salesforce, classic Salesforce versus Lightning Salesforce. They have put years of effort into, that crap of a thing, to at least on the surface deliver a better experience to their users. And I guess they will say that, it's the same experience, but it had technical debt. It didn't feel new enough and people wanted something different. I still think that the entire thing should burn in flames. Like if someone wants to get me aggravated, just put me 2 minutes like working with Salesforce, lightning or otherwise, I'll just burst in flames.
2 minutes and a matchbox.
No, I'll self-combust. I don't need any additional fuel. It's just horrible. Sorry, Salesforce folks.
I'm guessing they're not sponsoring this episode?
No, not this one, the following one. So then it's going to be, I'll be hating on ServiceNow or something. I don't know. We'll see.
Oh, so your format is anti-sponsorship. I'm getting that. I usually say that the best teams I work with have transitioned from focusing on tech debt to finding tech capital. As in, rather than doing cool things, tech for tech's sake, whenever we have, what's tech debt, right? Just like you said, Phil, how do we categorize it? So
right.
If it's something, for example, oh my God, everything we have is in Python 2, that's end of life, it had end of life a couple of years ago. It's just not supported. No matter, even if it was perfect code, we can no longer keep using it because eventually we're going to have some security issues, whatever. We have to change that. Okay, you make the case for it business-wise and you start slowly migrating away from it. And then there are things like every time we want to touch this, every time we want to enable another integration for the marketing people so they can check things, we have to spend hours and hours because the code there is just a big ball of spaghetti. And when that's the case, I usually say, you don't say there's tech debt, we have to rewrite it. You make the case and tell, the product manager you're working with, hey, if we take now X days, we can now solve this in eternity. So tech capital is saying, rather than having to spend X amount of time every time I want to do this, is saying we can create a tool or we can make a new system or we can do whatever. We can integrate a third party. And then this problem you have is going to be solved, 80% of it every time. We can do five times as many of these whenever you want to. And that's just bringing value. So even if at the end of the day, we're just making, these marketing integrations, if we can do it faster, that's a superpower for the marketing team. That's bringing the company value.
Yep.
And if you can say it that way, people will let you rewrite in Rust whatever you want. You just need to make the real case
just
for it.
Connected to the business bottom line. And I think this, now at this point of clarity, I think this is a good point to move to our next fact. And our second fact for this episode is actually my fact. And my fact is that human babies, as they grow in their first year of life, on average, they push to production major features, 6.5 major features every month, or about 1 major feature every week.
That's a very efficient developer.
Think about it. Every week, a major release of the product with features that the end users, in this case the parents, can actually experience. Like suddenly they smile, suddenly they have fine hand-to-eye coordination, they start to talk, they start to walk. Amazing feature. While I think if we look at most R&D teams, like delivering a major feature even every month is a huge achievement. So I think there's a lot to think about velocity here. I'm bringing up this fact because I've recently became a parent myself. So I'm literally seeing these features being delivered into production, and I'm always in awe. Like my kid Ari, 2 weeks ago, he was just like flailing his hands, and I was like grabbing things with like fine-tuned dexterity. And I was like, "Who taught you that? When did that happen?"
But does it help when both parents are engineers?
I don't know. I haven't tried. My wife has always been an engineer since I met her, so I haven't had the chance of checking the other scenarios. And I have no plans on that. Sorry. But I think the really interesting thing here is how we perceive velocity and how that impacts how we run our business. And I think it also kind of connects to our previous fact with tech debt. There's different velocities when we're building new features that impact the end customer and our the experience with our products, and things that maybe are kind of in the backstage. And I wonder maybe you can share some of your experience on how you can, when you work with your teams, how do you get the most velocity out of them aside from turning them and the product into babies?
Well, I had the pleasure of growing 3 babies, and I can tell you that there's one feature that never gets delivered on time, at least, with our DNA, with our genes, and that's teeth. You feel like, oh, they're teething, it's going to be out next week, or any day now, and 6 months pass, and only then, they're over a year old, and you get one too. And I feel like that's more like many of the companies I see, because it's like, yeah, you're going to get that, end of the sprint, another sprint. We just need half of the next sprint. And all of a sudden, it just took you 1 quarter to deliver something that initially on the roadmap should have taken 2 sprints.
Yeah, right.
And what I feel like is that this disconnect is what usually creates like a negative feedback cycle, where once this happens, because, I don't know, someone had a deadline, we blew an estimation, we had a legit reason. And people on the other end then are skeptical. And then you get this weird cycle where we start buffering our estimates. The other end is like skeptical even when it comes to that. And all of a sudden, we don't want to commit to anything unless it's very clearly worth it, because we're afraid how long it's going to take, and no one's going to push the brakes. No one's going to say, hey, this is taking us a month. Maybe it's not worth it. I very rarely see companies realize that, hey, had we known in advance this was going to take 3 months, we wouldn't have done it. We would have chosen something else. So maybe we can stop or rescope, right? And that's something that I feel like we're not having enough discussions around. Because velocity is not just how fast we're banging on keyboards, it's how fast we get to value. So if we get lost, let's reroute.
Do you think companies that do release new features, they should be aware of the fact that setting deadlines is not the concrete way of estimating whether a feature can be released or not? Because setting a deadline that's very strict, essentially, it's, you can't predict if it's going to happen. So if you do come up with this approach of setting these strict deadlines, should you be prepared to not meet them?
I think you're touching on agile versus like a waterfall theory of constraint. Like the basic understanding with agile is that we don't know nothing about nothing. We have no ability to predict the future. We barely know what's at the edge of our noses. So instead of aiming for completion of all the tasks, we're aiming to do our best to complete as many tasks as possible, and we iterate.
Right.
We complete more. We move to another sprint, depending on obviously the specific methodology being used. Mythology also. Maybe you're like in ancient Greece. I don't know.
The mythology of software engineering.
Like Zeus is an amazing backend engineer, I think. So you move from sprint to sprint, and you try as a sprint in sprints as a sequence. You want to try and cover as much as you can, but that does make a challenge in coordinating between the different parts of the business. When do you get that delivery? When do you get those teeth out? And the customer is waiting. We need to deliver that. So that, I think, also is about managing expectations across the stack. But I think also, interestingly, this connects back to the baseline of this fact, which is velocity itself. So velocity is not about just how quickly you deliver features. It's about how quickly you move in general. So when things go wrong, you can respond to that quickly enough, pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and get to completing the next feature, completing the next thing, and kind of mending the cycles, even though things failed or ran into issues. So that's why I think that velocity is important.
I think a lot of that sort of so I sit in product, I sit in like go-to-market and product, so maybe I'm not the right person, but I think a lot of that rests on like the person who's creating the solution, as well as designing the product. Like you can like release a feature over the course of 6 weeks. And if you're doing it iteratively enough, it just feels like very delightful for an end user. Or if you plan it well enough, then it starts to feel really delightful for an end user. But I have seen like in my career, like there, especially with startups, there's like almost an indexing towards like the big bang. Like, hey, we released this one huge thing. There's like never this iterative feel. Because you don't necessarily get to say, hooray, we did it. And it doesn't feel as good. But guess what? Your users don't really care. They're going to start adopting that feature slowly, regardless. And like you can push it towards them. And even when you're completely done rolling it out, but it feels really wonderful for your team to have that momentum. And it's highly motivating. And it starts making them think in a different way, or like, how could we do this thing, but smaller? And this is the first time in my career where like I've made a huge focus on this, and I've noticed like a big impact on myself
Amazing.
and my team.
I think it requires a lot of discipline as well, because I think especially as engineers, especially when I work with our engineering team or when I work with myself as an engineer, like you always have this need to build the best thing you can. Oh, I wanted to do this and that and all of the features, and I wanted the code to look amazing, and I want to have tests for everything. And it requires a lot of discipline to actually come in and say, no, I'm going to do less. I'm going to deliver the most minimal thing I can to the customer that will bring the needed value here, and then iterate on that. And it's not a human thing for most people. It requires discipline, requires building that muscle.
Well, as a mother with 2 under 3, perfection is not my best thing. So maybe you will find that out as your son gets older.
No, he's perfect. He's perfect. Cool. I think this is a great point to move to our third fact. Sam, I think that honor goes to you.
Yeah, so as you mentioned before, I wrote, I guess, what is the Bible on developer marketing or developer go-to-market. But so in order to do that, I did a ton of interviews with developers on how they discover, use, and activate within products. And I found something that I think is really interesting and almost like, I don't know, counterintuitive, but developers tend to spend more time on websites, especially like, product websites, than any other B2B buyer that I interviewed. Additionally, they also tend to actually read through their emails. Their open rate's higher than I've ever seen before. And, they actually read those emails and they actually check them out. So I tend to find that developer-focused tools and developer-focused founders don't necessarily think about go-to-market in sort of like a first principles way. They see it as an additive thing that you add later, which is true to some extent. You have to have a strong product, and everyone knows that. However, it is incredibly important because these folks are not only extremely critical of your messaging, but they do pay attention and they want to be loyal and they want to get excited by your messaging. It's not just checking the box for them. Right. And I think that's really interesting because I see go-to-market at a lot of these developer-focused companies as a check-the-box organization. Like they're doing these white papers, they're writing this copy, etc. But in reality, their work matters more in this industry than really anywhere else.
That's impressive. It's also kind of counterintuitive, like to at least the stigma that developers get. Like most people think, oh, developers are completely allergic to anything that is trying to market anything to them. But ironically, you're saying they're actually more engaging with marketing content.
I just feel like good marketing and brand, but they're just so like, we're all so used to seeing bad sales and bad marketing and bad brand. I mean, developers tend to spend a lot of money on things that they love. And I think that can be true for software too.
I think it might also, I'm trying to think about myself as a developer when I'm kind of trying to review a product. I think it might also be kind of the potential technical depth that you want to go into as a buyer. Like, I don't only want to understand if this is a good product for me. I want to understand how it works. I want to understand if it meets my standards as an engineer. Would I build it this way? You want to dive into the nooks and crannies. You want to go into the docs. You want to know, even if you aren't intending to use this with automation, you want to know that there's an API. Like, oh, that would be cool. That would make me appreciate this product more, even if it's just something that I'm looking to, I don't know, bring to my grandmother or something.
Yeah, actually what you said, Sam, really kind of resembles with me because I found myself when I search for, interesting products, I find myself actually sit on the product page for quite a while and be interested in the specific things that the company is offering that I might be interested. And the other weird fact is that anytime I actually get an email in my inbox, I do weirdly read it for some reason. And I don't know if it's just the catchy title or the catchy phrase that's used, but anything that lands in my main inbox, I read it. So, there is definitely big truth in that. And it definitely, resembles with me. And I think with a lot of people that, might be listening to this.
I gave a talk a few years ago, and I don't remember exactly the title. It was about developer experience. And I said that it boils down to the fact that you have to imagine that your users are the nitpickeriest people in the world, right? Because engineers are used to nitpicking on every pull request and reading every doc, looking for what did you miss? what's a mistake when it comes to their colleagues, when they're working with their peers. And we just have the same mindset, I think, when we move on to looking at developer tools. So it gives you, there's a bad side to it and a good side. The bad side is if they find any issue, they're going to get angry, like, who's this idiot? They don't know what they're doing. Just like the tech did earlier. On the other hand, if you delight them, even subtly, all of a sudden, they love you. So like, if the error code has a nice error message going along with it, that's cheeky, making them laugh, or points directly to a URL for what they need to fix in the dashboard or whatever, they're like, oh my God, they get me. And now they start telling everyone about how awesome your product is. So, it's a double-edged sword, but I feel like this is something that people have to understand. It's bad, but it's also, not bad as it's harder, but it's also something that can give you a lot of value if you know how to leverage it.
Well, I just feel like it goes back to what we were talking about with the babies and pushing the major features and sort of why velocity is important. Like when you are such a perfectionist, it's hard to have a quick velocity. So you have to figure out what to prioritize. And I think the persona of a developer tends to index towards perfection. But when you're running a business, you can't necessarily index towards that.
I think when I engage with developers, like as customers at the Pyramid, for example, they often come into the conversation trying to kind of outsmart you, like, oh, and how do you handle this scenario, big smarty pants? And like they expect you to fail sometimes, or like they want to, or at least they want to be proven that they know the material well, and that can create friction. But there's an inflection point. What if you answer one of those questions like, oh, I actually thought a lot about that, and here, look, there's an amazing architecture that we've built specifically for that. Then they go, oh, that's actually really cool. Oh, tell me more about that. And then it moves from attacking it to like just geeking out on it. Oh, yeah. And it does it do that as well? Oh, that's super cool. Okay, I can see how it can work, and it rolls from there. And I think that really touches on the double-edged sword, that intelligence towards perfection. Like you're both, when you're you're an engineer, catering to engineers, you're both trying to get on this kind of plateau towards awesomeness. And if you can reach that the thing can, it's a hard journey, but if you reach that, it can create really amazing interactions. And I think those are the ones that I enjoy the most, like when I'm building.
Yeah, and I think one thing I mentioned here while listening to both of you guys is you both mentioned the word delightful, and I've come across that word quite often when we talk about different software. And I think that word kind of encompasses in itself the fact that you're trying to offer a great experience to a developer, but you're also trying to reach the fundamentals that your product is very good to use. And often that word symbolizes it. I found myself anyway. And I think it's quite interesting because you see it on some websites and it really pushes out the product a little more, in my opinion, by just the phrasing that's used as well.
Awesome. Philip, I think this would be a terrific point to move to our fourth fact. And I believe that fact is yours.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm always coming with the quirky facts. So my fact for today is that China was widely criticized for blocking the most popular search engine, Google. But actually, that blockage can be defeated by just mirroring the site. So essentially, another version of Google was made called LGOG. Everything is just reversed. And because everything is reversed, suddenly it doesn't get blocked by the Chinese firewall.
The content is reversed, or just the domain? Everything
is reversed. It's literally, if it's as you were looking at the Google site through a mirror.
Oh wow!
And suddenly that stops the whole Chinese firewall blocking the website. So it's available to you, but if you want to use it, you just gotta look for a mirror.
You put it up on the screen and you put a mirror up front and you look at the mirror.
Yeah, and then you can use Google without being restricted. It's quite insane.
That's I wonder who thought of that. Like it's an interesting way to obfuscate the content from, I guess, that huge firewall proxy thing that the government's running.
Yes. And actually, for anyone that's interested, you can go to lgug.com and you'll see the whole site just reversed.
Also, you can probably, what I'm talking about, you can have like a driver, like for the display card, just reverse the the screen for you. That's easier than putting on a mirror.
Well, yeah.
But I wonder why doesn't the Chinese Firewall do the same thing? Maybe they just didn't pick on it of yet. Maybe because of this episode, all of the connections in China are gonna fall apart. Thanks, Philip.
Yeah, you're very welcome. I can actually give you a side fact. Also to do with Google, maybe not necessarily with a firewall, but did you guys know that Google hires goats every 2 weeks? And they want to be very ecological with the way they manage their surrounding area in Palo Alto and where the main headquarters are. And they hire 200 goats to graze the grass every 2 weeks and to fertilize the soil to be very ecological. And then that happens at a frequent basis. And they don't use any lawnmowers or anything like that.
This feels like a 0% interest rate phenomenon to me.
Just goats.
How many goats do they take? Like just a couple of goats, or is it like 200 goats?
200. It's a whole herd. Yes. Apparently, so this is what I saw on the internet. It's very frequent to drive past their main campus and see goats on the field. And people have just become accustomed to it.
Did you see it on Google or
but I find it
on
very strange.
I'm sorry, but that sounds like bullshit or goat shit. I mean, who cleans that up?
I mean, at least that's what Google says, or maybe. I just found it quite funny because we look upon Google as being a leader in the space, being so technologically advanced. So it almost the contrast there is unbelievable, but. I guess maybe someone who's listening to the podcast will be able to verify.
I think for anyone who's visited California, I think it makes total sense. Considering now that I know this fact, I'm kind of expecting goats to appear everywhere else as Californication and Americanization kind of propagate that. Just like you can't really get any real straws anywhere now. I feel like that affect so please expect a goat to appear by your house later today, Philip, to clean up the lawn. It kind of also reminds me of, I kind of mentioned communicating on top of goats. It reminds me of that RFC of communicating IP on top of pigeons. So there's like a whole white paper describing how you can do full back-to-back communication with valid IP addresses over pigeons. And I feel like maybe with global warming and kind of infrastructure failing, maybe it is time to revert back to more classic means of communication and maintenance.
There is something.
The secret sauce is pigeons and goats. That's the bottom line.
It was wonderful hosting both of you, Sam and Aviv. It was a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you for dedicating your time to have fun with us today on this podcast and learn some cool facts. And we'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.
I think this is the perfect time to wrap up the show. If you liked this podcast, tell your friends about it. If you didn't like it, tell your enemies about it.